Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach. And today we have with us Amy Anderson, who is co-founder of Wild Coffee Marketing. Amy, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much, Mike, for having me.
Hey, so I'm excited to talk about marketing because I am all things marketing, and I'm also excited to hear the story behind what in the world Wild Coffee has to do with marketing. So give us a little bit of your background, what led you to think maybe I should co-found a marketing firm, and then what went into that naming, because I always love to hear the stories behind the entrepreneurial journey, but also the names of the company.
Absolutely. Well, I started my almost 30-year marketing career in New York in the media business. I was at 17 Magazine, and I really loved the pace in the media business, but I really struggled with the lack of what I considered to be sort of performance data for print, right? You had circulation numbers, views per copy. And so I found myself actually at Klein managing a $70 million broadcast budget. And that felt a little better, right? We had Nielsen ratings. I could really sort of talk about viewership. And then it was the mid-90s, and we actually had sort of pure digital media plays. So I joined the original group that launched the NewYorkTimes.com, New York Times Digital. And there, actually, for that website, we had registration up and gated content. And that was the first time I really got to see performance-based marketing and viewership and personalized content. And from there, I went into the B2B world, right, with tech companies and some telecom. And in 2015, I had taken a few years off to raise my young sons, who are now teenagers. And I decided that when I went back to work that I wanted to have some flexibility to raise my children. And so I started doing some consulting, thinking I was good at doing the work, but was I actually good at running a consulting firm? And I joined forces with my former boss and business partner, Solomon Wansier, and we launched Wild Coffee. And Wild Coffee is actually a plant native to Florida that grew all over my backyard in Coconut Grove. And it was this really hardy plant that has berries that are somewhat like coffee beans, and you can roast them and drink them. It's not coffee, it's a coffee-like drink, but it was super hardy, grew really fast, attracted butterflies and birds and bees. And I just thought it was this really sort of remarkable plant that grew freely and wildly in my backyard, and thought it really sort of symbolized what we try to do for our clients in this firm.
That's awesome. And so then throughout your website or your marketing materials, there's always going to be, I'm certain of, coffee references. And, that's really a fun thing. It's kind of like people that are into pets, you'll have, the dog as your mascot or whatnot.
Exactly. I mean, it gives you a lot of fun. For us, energy is everything. And that's one of our core values of the company. Mike, that if you're not always learning and always sort of staying on top of things and pivoting, and you're not going to do well in this business. And so, Yes, you'll see references to ideas brewing and things getting amped up, and it's been a lot of fun for us.
So you've come from the background of big media and big marketing. So who is it that you work with now? What is the typical problem that you solve for your clients?
We have a couple of areas. I wish I could say we specialized, but we have a diverse team of 15 consultants. They're all senior, because we work as outsourced CMOs and running outsourced marketing teams. So they have to have this level of experience where they can ramp up quickly, whether it be in a vertical, in a specialty like paid digital or social. So we do actually a lot of localized multi-location marketing for franchises and corporate-owned locations. Financial services is one that we really love. We do a lot of e-commerce. So we're pretty much industry agnostic. And as you know, in this market environment, you have to be able to go really wide and really deep, especially as a digital marketer.
Yeah, but yet I would say, as with anything, it's got to be balanced. meaning you can't go too wide and too thin, because then people don't view you as that, somewhat of an expert in a specific vertical or not. So it doesn't mean that you need to only work with financial services, for example, but you need to at least have some core competencies in those.
Absolutely, because people don't want to hire an outsourced CMO that has to learn the business.
Yep.
Right. So,
right.
There are probably 10 to 12 sort of verticals that we work in, or the team has experience. And then we've hired a pretty diverse team so that we can say, oh, this is a great fit for this person who has worked on these 3 clients and this vertical and these 4 CRMs. And so we can really match our consultants with the right clients to produce really powerful engagement.
And what is a typical, maybe a first project when someone comes to you and says, okay, we have, engaged with your brand. We know you guys are the right fit. What's the first step? What do you see for us? And what are you looking at? And you're looking for those holes in the bucket, and you notice, 3 or 4 or 5, but you got to start with one. What are you typically seeing as the first project or the first initiative that you're working on for clients?
Well, it includes somewhat of an audit, right? So we'll go through everything sort of in our pitch process to understand what their strategy is, what tactics they're deploying. We'll look at all their KPIs, all their metrics. But really for us, we insist on doing positioning, messaging, and personas before we do any work. Because if you don't know who you're talking to, then you're not going to know what to say to them. And that is really critical. So we go deep with positioning. Really sort of craft. We'll do a day or 2 sort of positioning workshop. We will craft those positioning statements. We will do persona work that's backed by market research. And then we come out with this blueprint and a way to move forward that makes everything that we do sort of cascade from there in a super cohesive way.
That is really huge, because I think a lot of people don't pick up on that. And it could be something as simple as going, depending on how big the company is that you're working with, but going to their maybe customer service department and looking at the inbound tickets or questions or social media, and just researching and listening, kind of using it as a listening post to see what customers say, whether it's a question on customer service or review of the product or service, and watch for certain buzzwords and comments to go, ooh, that's something that's resonating with our target audience, good or bad. And maybe it's like, well, I can't stand the way that they, whatever the case is. And then you can use that as a way to fix it, and then talk about how you fixed it using what you listened to. Now, you guys probably go through and with the client and go, okay, we're going to pick 100 of your clients and we're going to mystery shop them, or we're going to call them and interview them, and we're going to find this stuff out. But there are several ways to kind of really dive into that persona and avatar, right?
Yeah, you're exactly right, Mike. And it's such a good point that you bring up about talking to customers, because we find that if we ask a client, we'll sit in a room with a C-suite and we'll say, tell us why people do business with you. And the reason that they believe that they're successful is likely not what their clients are going to say about them. It's usually more nuanced. It's usually in areas that they don't expect. So as part of that process, we absolutely will go and interview directly our clients, customers. We will secret shop them. We do look at review data and everything else. And oftentimes we'll find sort of unique selling points that the CEO didn't even know they really had.
Yeah. Like, oh, well, hey, Mr. or Ms. CEO, please describe your company and what your competitive advantage is. And they'll tell you, and they'll go, oh, well, we excel in this, and our competitive advantage is that. And then all of a sudden you hear from your actual clients, and they're like, well, the thing that we love is, and it's like, what? I mean, that's wonderful, but
exactly.
Man, we would have never. Wow. And so I think that it really is eye-opening and is well worth the time. And then what happens is that becomes almost like that, I don't know, watershed kind of a concept, or where it's like, okay, now we need to make sure that these words and these phrases and these, problems are addressed in all of our messaging, whether it's our sales, collateral, marketing, social media, everything. And it needs to be cohesive. You get back into, from the academic side of marketing, it's called IMC, Integrated Marketing Communications. Well, that message needs to be cohesive and consistent across all channels. It can't be, oh, well, our salespeople say it this way, and then our marketing material says it another way. It needs to be the same thing, almost kind of like just taglined out. I mean, not literal, but what do you do with clients to make sure that once you've dialed in that messaging, to make sure that they are really getting it across all of their departments and channels that way?
Well, we work very closely with our clients. It's actually interesting. We sit in the C-suite of most of our clients. So in their weekly executive meetings, we participate in those. Okay. So that's how our model has differed a little bit from a typical sort of marketing firm where you get a brief and you perform work. We are actually up in driving strategy, hearing what's happening at the executive level and focused on business growth. So we have a lot of influence with what happens with our clients. And we work very closely to ensure, say, a customer service team is working from the same sort of set of messages, same elevator pitch, all the way up to executives in the company. And since we actually manage most of the activities for our clients, it's easier for us to control, right? Because we're developing email campaigns, running social, developing websites, issuing press releases, all of that sort of comes from us.
Yeah, that's a big piece. It's not just, oh, here's your SEO analysis, here's your social media postings for the month we did last month. It is, we're up in this with you, and it's not, maybe it's not necessarily performance based, but you are driven by performance. And what I find when I've got a client that's the exact same way there, and you sit in these meetings, and at some point you're like, okay, do I really care that operations made this quick update report? But then over time you're like, ooh, hey, you guys in operations said this. That made me think of what manufacturing department said over here, and we ought to do this initiative. And so you're watching for these opportunities to have synergies. And I think that's a really big opportunity there.
Absolutely, because the way people talk about the company, employees do, they're your best source of PR.
Yeah.
Right. At Wild Coffee, our consultants actually do business development, right? Because we're all out there talking about what we do all the time. And so when you're really embedded within a client, you can develop more than advertising creative, more than campaigns, more than sort of tangible marketing work. It's actually driving strategy for communications at all levels of the organization. And plus, Mike, we own in many ways customer data, customer communications, the most visible aspects of any company, whether it be a website or social media. And so it is integral that we're in that C-suite having those conversations, reporting on actionable data so that it will influence other areas of the operations of a company.
Yeah, that's really, again, that's a really big piece. So when you hear an opportunity from these meetings, or in being embedded is what I like to think of it as, what is your first step when you think, okay, we've dialed in the messaging, our target audience, now let's get into that phrase that people have heard of before, but I personally don't think that it's a thing anymore, which is content marketing. And the reason I don't think it's a thing anymore is back 10 years ago or so, it was like, oh my word, content marketing. Yes, that's amazing. Well, now it's like, it's just good marketing. You don't call anything, just do it this way, because you need to educate, you need to teach, you don't need to push. So what is your go-to when you start putting together good content to educate target audiences for your clients?
Well, I think when we talk about that content, being genuine, especially in these times, emerging from a pandemic with what everyone's sort of been through in their world, it has to be genuine. And I think it has to be more of a conversation. Right? Power pages for SEO are still sort of a factor in looking at keywords when it comes to your content, but really it's how can you make that content genuine, helpful, conversational, relevant, timely, right? And so we're always looking at what do we need to say to our target customer that helps solve certain pain points in their lives, not let's put together this content because it's packed with keywords and we're selling and selling. I heard of a pharmaceutical rep recently said that they had the mandate in their company to stop selling, to stop. And all they were to do was to connect with physicians they were visiting. Yeah. And that people are craving that connection. They don't want to be sold right now.
Yep.
And they see when something's absolutely, and they see when it's disingenuous, right? So I think to just, we sort of may have a strategy or sort of a direction we want to go in with content, positioning our brand, but then the execution of it needs to be smart and relevant and really genuine.
Well, I agree with that, and I feel like there should be like core pillar pieces of content. Like if you know that you can solve this problem for this type of prospect, what is the buyer's journey? What are the things that go through that prospect's mind that they must understand, that sometimes they don't even know that they need to understand it yet, but they need to understand A, B, and C. And when they understand these things, then it's like, okay, now I've whittled it down to it's probably going to be your firm or your service. But what are those core pillar pieces of content? And you need to have those created. Now, up under the word content, the bullet points could be, what would that look like? Well, depends on the industry. It might be a white paper, it might be a blog post, it might be a podcast episode, it might be a video, whatever you want to think of it as. But once those core pieces of content are there, now you're developing the relationship and the rapport to just kind of get to know. And then when it comes up a conversation like, oh, we just really get worried about X, and you're like, oh, you know what? A lot of people are the same way. You know what? We just put together this whatever, podcast episode. I'm going to shoot that to you. Just listen to it and let me know what you think. Then it becomes being an educator and an advocate for that person you're dealing with, not some sales thing like, here's my glossy brochure. Do you want to get this up and running?
Exactly. We have a client. It's actually really interesting. The men's formal wear industry is super fragmented. And there is a roll-up happening of many, many men's formal wear stores in the central corridor of the U.S. We are leading the charge on that. And grooms, during the wedding process, it turns out, could use a lot of education. Huh. So from renting their tux, getting their guys in order, all the timelines, things they need to be doing that they have zero idea that they need to be doing. And it's a really fun funnel for us to work with. From the time a guy proposes and has a wedding date, all the way through to his groomsmen returning their tuxes.
Yeah,
so
she
the
said
content
yes,
that we're developing. Exactly. We should start sticking some marital advice in there as well, right? So, it's at what point does this groom in this journey need to be educated, reminded, whether it's text, email, on the web. And so when you understand exactly from sort of a micro perspective where a customer is, you can design content that is relevant to them at that time. And that's when, we talk about being genuine, being conversational, making it fun for them and enhancing the journey. It has been a lot of fun for us to work on.
And I even would say that depending on the brand, like if you're selling, bubble gum, you don't need to be, affluent, as an example. But, depending on the brand, most people would need to have that knowledge of what content pillars check. And then let's create it. Okay, good. But I would say that the medium that the content is delivered on becomes then a big piece in perception. So what I mean by that is you could take this problem that your target audience has. So let's just say this, men's wear, the groom and the tux and all these tips, and maybe there's like this checklist or this whatever piece of content, and you could put that into a blog post. Yippee. Right? Wow. Okay. What's the barrier to entry to firing up a WordPress blog post and hitting paste? Nothing. Or you could go, oh, well, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and do a Facebook Live. Okay, that's cool. But still, people do know that it's free to do Facebook Live. You turn the camera on and talk. So if you really want to be seen as that trustworthy, authentic, transparent, expert authority, whatever you want to think of it as, you take that content and you put it into platforms that people kind of sit up and take notice on. So as an example, what if you could get in Entrepreneur Magazine, Forbes Magazine? Okay, wow, that's cool. Maybe you can't get into that, but maybe you can go, you know what? I'm going to talk about the same content on a podcast episode, or I'm going to put together a, book about, the 10 thing, she said yes, now what, or whatever the case is. So isn't there a point where the target audience kind of gets so inundated with stuff coming at them that they almost have a tendency to ignore it unless it is something that they feel like is substantive?
Well, it has to be substantive, and I think you need to reach them in a way, in the medium, in a way that makes sense, right? So, I see Instagram, for example. We love carousels and stories that sort of have some intrigue or, obviously are heavily image-based, but we can take that checklist for grooms. We can target the grooms on platforms like Instagram, and then we can deliver it in a way that's sort of entertaining and fun that they flip through. Sometimes using some humor, right, with really, really good design. So you really have to pay attention to the medium and not sort of just dump it all out there all at once, and really pay attention to when is my target audience most interested in this content? Is it Thursdays at 5 where our engagement rates go through the roof? So let's go ahead and do it then.
And that takes knowing your customer, getting back to research and all that, because as an example, what if you were selling dentures? You would probably not create a TikTok campaign.
Correct.
And I say that to be funny, right. But you also wouldn't sell skateboards in Reader's Digest, in a square ad in Reader's Digest, because your target audience isn't reading those or attending, TikTok videos. So I think that it does get down to where your target audience is, when, and what would attract them. And now you put that helpful teaching content in a fun way. Now, if you were selling, let's just say, high affluent tax services, you're probably not going to be glib and using too much humor, because it's like, I don't want to talk about my corporate finance to some person that is, trying to, do a viral video. So you have, again, it gets back to knowing your audience and then knowing what they will respond to. And then the age-old marketing thing, test, test, test.
That's right. That's right. And you have to, if you're going to even go on TikTok, you have to do it well and have to create content that is that works in that medium, right? So those are areas where you don't have a lot of room for failure and sort of poor execution, because it can fall really flat, right?
Yes. 100%. Well, Amy, I think we could go on and talk for about another 4.5 hours, but we better wrap her up and say, hey, if anyone is interested in reaching out, connecting with you, learning more about what you do, what's the best way that they can learn more about your company and then connect?
Well, the best way to learn more about us is just to go to wildcoffeemarketing.com. And there we have some examples of the work that we do and the type of strategies that we deploy, and you can see a little bit more about the team.
Excellent. Well, Amy, thank you so much for coming on today. It was a real pleasure talking with you.
Thanks, Mike. You too.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneursradio.com.